Só ver o contador, tá? Já tô...
Bom dia a todos e todas, bem-vindos e
Good
bem-vindas.
morning, everyone. Welcome to our third and last day of international seminar organized by the Justice and Peace Brazilian Commission, the Christian Churches Council, the Ecumenical Services Coordination, FEAT Brasil,
Sociais da CNBB e
da Unicino, the CNBB, and the Respira Brasil platform, with the support of ISEA, PAG, CRM, and Repam Brasil. In order to access simultaneous interpretation, please go to the interpretation button on your screen. My name is Luz Maria Garcia, and I am a law professor in the University of Rio de Janeiro, and I represent ISE in this event. The title of our seminar is Brazilian Tragedy, a Risk to the Common Home, and the question in the title is not the expression of a doubt, but the expression of anguish, of pain, and bereavement in face of a country that had its democracy canceled and its right to health hindered by a politics that was purposely directed to the production of death. And today, we have reached 414.6 thousand deaths, not considering the under notified numbers. And these people are Romi's cousin, George's mother, my friend's son, Marcelo Deodoro, from my neighborhood, Isaías Banil, an indigenous leader, friend of Nara, who spoke to us yesterday, Paulo Gustavo, the comedian, and so many other people. All of us here have lost dear people, and most of these deaths could have been prevented. And the main articulator of the program extermination of the Brazilian population still holds the presidency. And in order to speak about the pandemic and the sanitary crisis and the health crisis in Brazil, we will hear from Dr. Gonzalo Vecina, Dr. Aida Cristina do Nascimento Silva, and Dr. Peter Pearl, who I thank for being here and welcome. And first of all, we will hear from Dr. Gonzalo Vecina. He graduated in the Health University of São Paulo and has a master's in health by EASPFGD. He has acted as the Municipal Secretary of Health and as the National Secretary of Health Surveillance. He was the president of our health surveillance agency, Anvisa. He is a professor in the Public Health University of São Paulo and superintendent in hospitals Sírio-Libanês ever since 2007. Thank you very much, Dr. Vecina, and you have the floor. I was muted.
Ele está sem alto, não?
Bom dia, pastora Luz Marina.
Good morning, Pastor Luz Marina. It's a huge honor to be here with you and with all other participants in this moment to discuss the Brazilian tragedy, and with our subtitle, A Risk to the Common Home. All Brazilians are, and a good part of the world is being struck by this pandemic, and I think this pandemic is a wake-up call and calls our attention to a few things that we previously thought were normal, but aren't, and we need to understand that. It is not normal how we're destroying the environment. It is not normal to live with inequality like we do in Brazil. It is not normal to have a democratic system like the one that has been implemented by Bolsonaro in power. And that is why we're all calling for this president to be deposed and for democracy to be saved from such a difficult situation. And I wanted to bring two ideas to the table to demonstrate the set of errors that our government has committed. The first idea is related to when does a pandemic end? A pandemic can end in two ways, which is through the end of the people susceptible to catching the disease. How can we not have anyone else susceptible to the disease? Because everyone has already caught the disease. And you began by mentioning the number of people who have officially catch the disease. Officially, about 14 million people have had the disease. But according to the studies we have carried out, we believe that this number is close to 20–25% of our population. So it's very likely that we probably have out of 210 million Brazilians, around 45 million people who have caught the disease. And it is an estimate that is more realistic. About 45 million people have already caught the disease. And in order for 45 million people to have caught the disease, and officially 400,000 of which who have died, according to official estimates, this number of deaths is probably 540,000 deaths. And at the time, including the expected subnotification, according to research conducted by the University of São Paulo, we could be arriving at 540,000 deaths. And herd immunity for this disease is reached when about 70% of the population has already caught the disease. And in order for about 70% of the population to have caught the disease, how many deaths will we have to face? And today, about 25% of the population has caught the disease. So in order to reach 70%, how many more deaths will we have? About 1 million in order for us to reach herd immunity. And that is the project of our president. He is absolutely against social distancing, and social distancing has proven absolutely productive in decreasing the number of cases. In the European countries, in the Asian countries who have adopted social distancing, here in Brazil, several cities like Araraquara are examples that lockdown dramatically decreases the number of cases and the number of deaths. So lockdown is a fundamental policy. We need to have lockdown whenever the number of cases is on the rise. We're having a dramatic second wave with a very high number of deaths. In about 2 months, we have doubled the number of deaths in Brazil. And the only alternative the only alternative is social distancing. This disease, it has been proven that it feeds on human contact. It is people coming into contact with the aerosols that we emit when we speak, and that's what causes infection. So when the number of cases is on the rise, we need to have lockdown. There's no other way, and the president is against lockdown. And the president every day demonstrates that he's against using masks. So how can we prevent the droplets from exiting our mouth? And it's the mask, and the mask prevents the aerosols from infecting other people. So the masks are fundamental, and the concept is a mask does not protect me, it protects you. And when you protect me, I protect you. So everyone has to wear a mask. We need to avoid crowds, we need to avoid closed spaces, but the president is in favor of holding religious ceremonies, the face-to-face religious ceremonies, which ignores the God's omnipotence. We do have to pray, but we cannot pray in closed spaces. We cannot pray in churches. Why is that? Because that's where the virus is disseminated. In this time, we're particularly going through a rise in the cases, and right to religious freedom and the right to come and go is preceded by the right to life. And yesterday, the president even cited St. John and talked about the importance of religious freedom and the right to come and go that would be more important than the right to life, according to him. And the Constitution is very clear when it says that before all right is the right to life. And I think among Christians that in the world, there is reasonable consensus about this. So our president is against social distancing, he's against the use of masks, and finally he's against vaccines, which is the other way we can end this disease, is to not have any people susceptible because they have been vaccinated. That's how you can create herd immunity through the vaccine. And Brazil has 38,000 vaccination spaces, and if in every one of those spaces that are active 8 hours a day, and I vaccinate one person every 5 minutes, you have an activity before entering the vaccination room and after. And then there is the vaccination inside the room. And if the vaccination inside the room takes 5 minutes with 38,000 vaccination rooms, Brazil is able to vaccinate 70 million people a month. 70 million people a month. And the population that can be vaccinated in Brazil, which are adults over 18, we will not be vaccinating children and adolescents at this moment because they have not been tested for the vaccine. This vaccine, most vaccines are 2 doses. We only have one with 1 dose. Let's calculate that I would need to vaccinate people 320 million times. 300 million doses divided by 70 million doses is little less than 5 months. And we had vaccines available at the end of last year. We could have begun vaccinating in January, February, March, April, May. In May, Brazil would have had 70% of the population vaccinated. And what happens when we vaccinate? There's a drop in the number of cases, in the number of deaths. We have seen this in Israel. We have seen this in Scotland. We are seeing this in the US, and we're even seeing this in Brazil in the older age groups. If you vaccinate, the disease will decrease. Does it end? No, it doesn't end. Why doesn't it end? Because the virus is circulating in the world. So while we don't vaccinate the entire world, this disease will not go away. And what Biden did yesterday was very intelligent for a country that depends on world economy functioning. If we don't have vaccines for the entire world, the economy will not recover. So it wasn't nice of him. He did what had to be done at this moment when we're living through a state of exception. Allow everyone to fabricate vaccines so that the disease will stop, because if India is still with the disease active and the virus being transmitted, we will have new variants. And that's a probability. That's a high probability. It will keep happening while there are still virus being multiplied, while there's still virus being multiplied. And we will have new variants of the virus that are resistant to the vaccine. The second wave we're going through in Brazil is a fruit of the P1 variation, which appeared in the city of Manaus. This is confirmed. And if we have a third variant here, we will have a new wave. We need to take care not to have these new variants. We need to decrease the circulation of people who can bring new variants to Brazil. If I close the borders, will we not have the new variants? Unfortunately, that's not true. In our globalized world, all variants will arrive here, but every day that I gain in preventing a variant not from arriving in Brazil is a day where I have saved lives. So closing the borders and preventing the entrance of visitors who could bring new variants at this time has to be done. Of course, we need to pay attention to humanitarian issues, health treatment, education issues. We need to pay heed to the humanitarian aspect, but we need to protect the population from new variants. Yes, without shadow of a doubt. And we need to vaccinate. So if we had purchased vaccine, if the fascist president had allowed people to buy vaccines, he forbade the Chinese vaccine, and he's still saying bad things about China. Even yesterday, the AstraZeneca vaccine is a vaccine that's produced in a Chinese factory. So for him to badmouth the vaccine is something that is unbelievable. So right now, at this moment, we must make a great effort to obtain more vaccine. We could be vaccinated and we could have less deaths. And that's why the investigation going on in Congress right now needs to hold the president accountable for us not being vaccinated. Because right now, we have someone who's responsible for the number of deaths we have. And we can even calculate the number of deaths that could have been prevented. We will, at the pace we're going, Fiocruz and Butantan, the laboratories, the Fiocruz laboratory bought 100 million doses, and in August, we will be out of those doses. Fiocruz has bought 200 million, and all of these doses will have been delivered only in February of next year. There is a possibility that the purchase that was finally concluded in March of this year, last month, of the Pfizer vaccine, and Pfizer, rumor has it, has sold Brazil 100 million doses, but it has only delivered 1 million, and the other doses will be delivered by the end of the second semester. And we have the possibility of Janssen vaccines by the end of this year. And we also have the COVAX facility vaccine. Well, these deliveries are all scheduled for the second semester. So how is it that we can, if destiny is kind to us, how can we conclude the vaccination of the Brazilian population? In the best hypothesis, in November, in the worst hypothesis, in February. So this means that up until November or up until February, we will still have deaths caused by COVID. And there's no miracle, there's no magic. I'm talking about facts, cold hard facts, unfortunately. So, 2 minutes. We still have 2 minutes, Dr. Gonzalo. So we really need to do our homework and hold our president accountable. This president and his government are responsible for everything that is happening. And once we hold him accountable, we can't forget the lessons taught by the pandemic. First lesson, we need to stop. We need to stop destroying the environment because that's how this pest came about. Second, we need to understand the importance of social inequality in the world. This virus has shown us that it's not the virus that kills, it's poverty that kills. Poor people are dying 3 times more in Brazil than rich people who have access to treatment. Black people are dying 4 times more than white people. And it's not because they're Black, it's because they're poor. They need to go out to the street every day to guarantee their subsistence. And if you need to leave your house to work every day, you will encounter the virus. We need to fight inequality. We need to distribute income. We need to have an active income distribution policy. This is decisive, and this is a decision that the people need to make. Us as the people need to elect politicians that are committed to reducing inequality. It's not normal to have an unequal society, and we need to have a public health system, a universal public health system that is financed by public taxes. Our unified health system has saved Brazil at this time, and we need to guarantee that it keeps existing. The enemies of our health system exist. We currently have an ongoing project that wants to privatize our public health system. And the budget of the public health system has been decreased this year. So our enemies, the enemies of the public health system, are woke. So what are we doing? And right now, in this seminar, we're fighting this. So let's keep on doing it, because if we fight, we will see the fruits of our fight. And these results will be a more human world with less death. Thank you very much and congratulations, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Vicino. You bring us this emergency situation in a very important way as you bring data and we can discuss from the parameters that are being set forth by science, by the world of health. So we need that, in fact, and you were one of our witness of that request of impeachment for President Bolsonaro made by the evangelical and Catholic leadership. So we deeply thank you for your commitment and your presence here. We'll pass on to our second guest, Dr. Aida Cristina Nascimento Silva, undergraduate in health engineering by the University of Bahia, master in environmental technology and water resources by the University of Brasilia, has a doctorate degree by the Federal University of Bahia. She's a guest professor of the Health Institute of the Research Support Foundation. She's a professor at the Polytechnical School and a professor at the Gonçalo Muniz Institute. Thank you very much, Aida, for your presence. You have the floor. Well, good morning to all of you. I'd like to thank once again for the invitation by the community, by Luz Marina, by Bianca, Dr. Gonçalo lecture was very reflexive, and it is an honor to speak after this great militant of public health. I have a presentation, I have a PowerPoint presentation, and can you put that up, Luz Marina, please? Yes, we're going to do so.
Obrigada. Eu trouxe alguns pontos, né? Eu acho que são também convergentes.
I've brought converging points to Dr. Gonçalo. I have seen his trajectory in Brasilia with Anvisa, and I want to highlight, can you help out? Next, please. Well, I must highlight that the pandemic in this term of this pandemic that are diseases that are around all of our continents. We had the experience with the Spanish flu, and we have verified that it was responsible for 500 million infections around the world. And now we are in a new pandemic with social contrasts in the context of, unfortunately, of political scenarios, of misinformation to the population, and we verified this new mortal pandemic puts under test the very scientific knowledge, as you see people saying that it's just a flu, as Professor Gonçalo highlights here and talks about the confirmed cases, even with data from yesterday by the Ministry of Health, we have over 14 million cases confirmed. And although we have this whole scenario of mobilization of the public health system and the policy of public inclusion, there are some alarming and ever-growing cases and incidents in all levels of population, being the ones with a good economic situations and good welfare situation, but especially with vulnerable populations. In some points, shed light in the epidemiology, even environmental epidemiology that Gonçalo spoke of about the impact on the environment, making diseases as such as COVID. There was more particularly to animals, well, coming from animal diseases to human beings. And you see what can happen. And also globalization, which is a world political issue. The predatory practices of agribusiness and intensive agriculture strengthens the creation of new diseases and the viruses. They're agents, they're living beings that allow their to have their environmental resilience. So they adapt. And according to the epidemiology, well, this was all predictable. And we also verify a very important issue, which is the political connotation. And this is an important international seminar where we can verify that our democracy, I'm a Black woman and I know how hard it is to have access to democracy. So the Black population, where you don't have housing and basic sanitation, as essential having water to wash their hands in. When we verify the very government, the very administration of Brazil likes to spread fake news when they say um, we don't need vaccines, we need an early treatment. And here bring two reflections, and some epidemiologists talk about the lack of a single uh, policy against the pandemic. And upon ignoring the vulnerable populations that live in the fringe of uh, the cities, they end up considering a flu. And under this context, we have a population without information because, well, information generates action, and information from the political leaderships will generate that as well. And we have issues with jobs and income. We have currently a situation of the biggest chaos in terms of unemployment, where the vulnerable population, next slide please, as they believe it's just a common flu. We verify that data related to COVID show that how severe it is. Well, basically fourfold the the infection, or basically the population that needs to go out to be the breadwinner and to have the minimum necessary, well, to pay, I don't know, to pay rent or pay their bills, that ignore the situation of the mask use, for instance, as the only protection against this virus, with the problem of well, saliva. And in a simple crowding you see this uh, unawareness of the risk, because there are leaderships that signal there's no need to protect for protection. So next one. And we verify also that the Fiocruz itself, basically we have a network of research and collaborators here around this table with us. And I'm quite honored to be talking with Mr. Gonzalo, Luz Marina, and so many people who are listening to us. And we verified we have the know-how of important researchers in the national scenario, like the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, Butantan University from the Northeast, who are attempting to gather resources for the production of vaccines in Brazil. And we verify in the ranking of the countries, the more affected countries. Well, first of all, you have the United States with over 577,000 deaths, and then second Brazil, and then we have India now in third with regard to that, and some cultural uniqueness that Dr. Gonzalez brings. We are a very faith-based people, and it's important to pray. We have a cultural, religious diversity, and we are certainly uh, aware of God. But when you think about the lack of guidance, and even the lack of awareness on how to reach the unified health system, because is an important triage of filtering, of guiding, in fact, these people, the subjects of health that are being affected, that minimally affected, well, to guide them on how to act. And we verify that the unified health system, that with the very constitution of Brazil, well, there was a realignment of efforts, and it was fundamental. It could have been even worse. The health system adopted measures on the improvement of or the training of human uh, resources. There was an important mobilization by the unified health system, where it responds to 193 million citizens that unfortunately they are they have a profile of a vulnerable profile because we have a great strata of population that not necessarily know what is unified health system. So when Professor Gonçalo, and he says that he led the Anvisa that regulates drugs and treatments with the vaccines, that's a unified health system. This is all unified health system. The offer of drugs is SUS. The treatment, it's it's all unified health system. So you see the simple basic health education with the washing of the hands and simple measures on how to use mask, not to wear it for 2 hours straight, and try not to be in crowded spaces. This comes from the World Health Organization, and it is of utmost importance. And you see strategies of contention, and we strengthen more and more the need for social distancing, even if we have the population that with the productive age groups being vaccinated. We have the elders, those groups, and even suspicious cases and the quarantine the household, exploring herd immunity, as Dr. Gonzalez has brought. But we see an important disparity, which is a social inequality, where most of the population that lives in the northeast of Brazil, in the Midwest, require to go to the streets. They due to the labor market they are in, to have their very food, their minimum sustenance they require every day. And on the other hand, we have the blocking of social activities, the closure and lockdowns that were not as effective due to this disparities given our social inequalities. And we must see that the science has cooperated through studies and research with the with study groups and universities, not only university in the we have in all regions of the country, in the Ministry of Health and the programs of research and development and innovation, trying to gather more and more resources. We have the research committee ever since February 2020, with the strengthening of research groups for the identification of vaccines at more affordable prices and more interesting for national scenarios. Even the procurement of immunoderivatives from other countries, eh, or, or byproducts rather, and we verified that there is an issue of important signals such as diagnosis, sequencing, the impacts, clinical assays, the vaccines. So there's a context of mobilization from scientific community and technical scientific communities from the leaderships of the governments and the government structures, not political leaderships. We must say there are differences on that. And we verified that, well, in order to have the validation of a vaccine, here we have the different scenarios where the universities, they're decentralized around the whole national territory, trying to create uh, the fight or subsidies to fight emerging viral situations. Then we must say that, well, next one, for you to have the validation of a vaccine, it requires years of research from the beginning of phase 1, 2, and 3 up to its clearance and release by the regulatory agencies, and even Anvisa that regulates and authorizes this vaccine to go around the national territory. So we must be aware that there is another relevant point, which are the adverse effects of the vaccines, and this weaken, well, basically it undermines the credibility of the vaccine and in the discourse. Uh, well, because this government basically says, well, I'm vaccinated, so I don't need to have the vaccine. So you have points that bring clearly that there is a need of raising awareness to the population in using media and in important information, such just like the Justice and Citizenship Commission. for people to be aware of the importance of educational measures and the immunization or mass immunization, this under a perspective of the government, of the administration, in a perspective of society. And we verify that the clinical phases, phase 1, 2, and 3 of the vaccines, well, even for a definite validation, well, we we are still in an emergency and experimental phase. We are the very experiment of the drug intervention, and we see the unified health system. Well, we have the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation supporting the phases of approval from the circulation of the virus, genetic sequencing, preclinical phase up to market phase, and even the import of the immunobiological products, which is the responsibility of the Ministry of Health, and with drugs that you have effectiveness and efficiency. And we see the scenario of April 29th, 2021 of WHO, where you see there's a need that all continents to be committed, even if the rich or developing countries have been leaders and have created strategies individually, but for the whole population to be immunized to guarantee the reduction of deaths and and the variants, as Dr. Gonzalo has mentioned, the variants of the virus, because it is a virus that has environmental resilience, well, to reduce its circulation, and we strengthen the national scenario in Brazil that the unified health system, well, there are relevant issues such as critical variables for the analysis of the impact of the pandemic. So, after 12 months, there was a duration of this episode. We verify it is not a common flu, and we verify that it is very severe. It's very lethal. The virus is lethal, and we have verified that populations, regardless of economic social classes, they are vulnerable populations. And but of course, I mean, the the populations that do not have housing or have a problem with labor, and there's a hardship of testing and the capacity of the very public system. After 12 months, the unified health system was able to help people who have private healthcare plans, together with the vulnerable populations, and we have the issue of people who are subjected to the virus. And so we have the healthcare professionals, the basic health professional, well, all those professionals. Well, we need to be empathetic, so we need to feel, to be in each other's shoes. So this is the basic principle of humanity and the response. Well, now we are going back to the retail services, and schools are coming back. Um, we have the institutional capacity. We have the incidence, the bigger and bigger incidence of problems in the private sector, the very failure of companies, the bankruptcy of mid and small sized companies, and the trust of consumers. We have the issues, the leadership issues with managers. Basically, the managers of states and municipalities, they need more and more to strengthen information and education and health of communities. And these communities, I mean the vulnerable population especially, because they work in the households of people who have the income. So it's not the ones that go to sell their products in the informal markets. No. And we have verified that in the ranking, once again, well, the more that we have the scenario of immunization, of the purchase of vaccines and this more strong view that of the need of the vaccine that and that the collapse has been installed. The deaths are ever rising. It's over 414,000 deaths of common citizen. People will have their importance. Families damaged in mental health and physical and social health as well. And we have we never left the second position in debts. And we see we see mobilizations of middle class that they say they authorize the president to, well, arguing that he's not being able to lead, because saying that it's a lot of well, this is a lot of like of humane thought that we see every day. After 12 months, where studies and research have shown, well, we have the limitation of resources in universities, and all of that makes it so hard, well, to advance in the unified health system. And we verified that the law of 1990s that talks about the the condition of promotion, protection, and recovery of health is our only policy of public health. It's just like Professor Gonçalo says, when they talk now they talk about privatizing the unified health system. It only strengthens particularly the protection to health of the population, or it weakens the health. So they want the population to have private health only. So trying to prevent us from having equalitarian access, we need to promote social health with inequality while guaranteeing the maroon populations, the riparian populations, and the ones that live in societies and surrounding the largest regions. So we need to guarantee them health, household, income, clothing, hygiene. And this is what the most important thing is. And we verify more and more that the territorialization of the unified health system, of the basic health units that treat the infected or suspected individual, to strengthen the models of management in surveillance, in humanization, in strategy of health and promotion of health, in the state of health of the population in general. We live more and more today, and we are aware, and it's quite clear for us that this virus made us reflect on empathy, on humanization, that nobody, the richer they can be, they're better than anyone else. We depend on each other, on their hygiene, on their washing of hands, on the mask use, the mask wearing, being a disposable one or not, is fundamental in the context that we are not aware of the mutation and how this virus can replicate in the context of in the strong context of environmental impact and shift in biomes. And I'd like to close by saying with this quote by Vines in 2020. It says, COVID-19 opened our eyes for the fact that health and disease come from far. They rely on society and its productive structure, on how we even bring our capitalist desires. The virus convinced us on the need of a more complex look to diseases, the empathetic look, and the justice, social justice look in reducing, not only working with the growth, but with the development of society, where all can have minimally housing, health, education, income, and information. I hope we can cooperate with one another to have a better society. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aida, for your reflection, your contributions. I, I think it had a lot to do with what Dr. Vecina said, and we need to understand that first of all, we need to protect SUS, our public health system, which is our biggest asset in the implementation of public health. So that's something we need to defend. And the other thing is that the impact of the pandemic, in my perception of what both of you said, the impact of the pandemic would have been very different had we not have had such inequality in our country. So we will keep on thinking and reflecting about this. And now I would like to invite our international guest for this morning. He is an Australian lawyer who is the director of the Commission of Churches for International Relations in the World Churches Council in Geneva, Dr. Peter Prohl. You know that the World Council of Churches has been a historically important partner of the ecumenical movement in Brazil in fighting for democracy, human rights, integrity, and the preservation of the planet, justice, and peace. And that's why it's an honor to have Peter with us. Thank you very much, Peter. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Pastor Luz Marina, and to all the organizers of this very important and very timely international seminar. It's an honor for me to represent the World Council of Churches in this gathering, and a special honor for me personally to follow such eminent speakers as Dr. Vecina and Dr. Silva. I listened very carefully to their interventions, and it's clear to me now that my remarks will really only serve to emphasize some of the excellent points that they have made. So I will try to be a little bit briefer than originally planned. No nation has escaped the tragic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is by definition and par excellence, a global pandemic that threatens each and every one of us. But at this moment, it has two particularly dramatic centers concerning to us all, India and Brazil. On Monday, the World Health Organization said that together, India and Brazil accounted for more than half of all new infections in the whole world last week. In the week of 26th April, Brazil recorded almost 422,000 new infections out of just over 5.7 million globally, and 17,365 deaths out of 93,500 globally. That's almost 1/5 of the global total death count. WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus rightly observed that what is happening in India and Brazil can happen anywhere, unless public health precautions that WHO has been calling for since the beginning of the pandemic, like wearing masks, social distancing, and proper hygiene, are taken. And although vaccination campaigns are now proceeding more rapidly, at least in some countries, as Dr. Tedros said, vaccines are part of the answer, but they are not the only answer. COVID-19 infections and mortality rates have continued to surge in Brazil, causing terrible suffering for many families and communities. Brazil has now lost, as many of you have remarked, well over 400,000 lives to the virus. The official count, which of course can be very much understated, as Dr. Vecina has noted. But those official figures represent a death toll second only to that of the United States. And Brazil has further confirmed a total of approximately 14.9 million cases, about 7% of the total population of the country. And this puts unbearable pressure on Brazil's health services. The evidence from Brazil has also shown that the idea that children are at zero risk from the virus is a tragic misconception. Official figures from the Brazilian Ministry of Health show that between February last year and mid-March this year, the virus killed at least 852 of Brazil's children up to the age of 9, including 518 babies under 1 year old. But when you take into account the 10-fold increase in deaths from unspecified acute respiratory syndrome during the pandemic, the actual toll is probably closer to 2,000 children under 9 years old, including 1,300 babies. Now, as the previous speakers have both remarked, Brazilian society was already one of the most unequal in the world before the pandemic. But the pandemic has amplified the vulnerability of poor and marginalized communities. Poverty and access to healthcare have been major factors in the course of the pandemic, and very often it is children who are among the most vulnerable. A study of 5,857 COVID-19 patients under the age of 20, carried out by Brazilian pediatricians led by Dr. Brian Sousa from the Sao Paulo School of Medicine, identified both comorbidities and socioeconomic vulnerabilities as risk factors for the worst outcome of COVID-19 in children. In the Brazilian context, the most vulnerable are Black children and those from very poor families, as they have the greatest difficulty accessing help and consequently are the most at risk of death. Moreover, the crowded housing conditions in which most poor people live make it impossible to socially distance when infected. Poor communities typically lack access to adequate sanitation facilities, let alone intensive healthcare services, further worsening their prospects. In addition, Brazil's once envied healthcare system had already been severely undermined by economic austerity policies. The COVID-19 pandemic magnified the adverse impacts of the 2016 constitutional amendment that capped public expenditure in Brazil. Consequently, at the time the pandemic hit, only 10% of Brazilian municipalities had intensive care beds, and the unified health system did not even have half the number of hospital beds recommended by the WHO. So it is no surprise and no accident that this weakened public health system is buckling under the current strain. Moreover, with the ending of the basic income payments made by the government from April to December last year, millions of Brazilians who had been briefly lifted out of poverty swiftly fell back down. Indeed, within 1 year, the number of people living below the poverty line went from 7 million to 21 million. Malnutrition is too often the result. And of course, malnutrition also has a major impact on the strength of the immune system. Earlier this week, we heard testimony from Brazil's former health minister, Mandetta, to the Senate inquiry that President Bolsonaro repeatedly ignored warnings that his response to the pandemic risked causing the health system to collapse. And I expect that we will hear more testimony of this kind as the inquiry proceeds. President Bolsonaro is accused of, and in many cases is actually on record, downplaying COVID-19 as a little flu, disregarding expert scientific advice on face masks and stay-at-home measures, resisting vaccines, and promoting unproven remedies. He has argued since the beginning of the pandemic that the economic impact of national lockdown measures would do more damage than the virus itself. Now, obviously, those in positions of government leadership are often called upon, especially in such a crisis situation, to make extremely difficult decisions balancing different interests and objectives, in many cases implying compromise and imperfect outcomes. However, President Bolsonaro's stated priority of protecting the economy in the midst of this pandemic raises some important questions. Can an economy actually continue to function in a society where so many people are becoming ill and dying, and essential health services are teetering on the brink of collapse? And if so, what sort of economy is that? And for whose interests does it operate? It is a false dichotomy to pretend that one can choose protecting the economy over addressing this public health emergency, or public health over the economy, for that matter. Each can only operate in tandem with the other. As Dr. Christos Christou, president of Médecins Sans Frontières, said in a statement in the middle of last month, public health measures have become a political battlefield in Brazil. The Brazilian authorities have overseen the unmitigated spread of COVID-19 over the past year. He said that the response in Brazil needs an urgent, science-based, and well-coordinated reset to prevent further avoidable deaths and the destruction of the once prestigious Brazilian health system. In 2009, Brazil succeeded in vaccinating 92 million people against swine flu in just 3 months. But today, the COVID-19 vaccination campaign is running at half speed. The government refused to buy vaccines several times last year based on political grounds and conspiracy theories. And this has put Brazil at the end of the line in terms of vaccine supply today. As of mid-April, around 11% of people had received at least 1 dose. This means that millions of lives inside Brazil and even beyond its borders are at risk from more than 90 variants of the virus currently circulating in the country, as well as any new variants which may emerge. It's important also to underline in this context, as the other speakers have as well, that it is increasingly acknowledged that the risk of new zoonotic diseases, that is, diseases spread from animals to humans, and related pandemics, is increased by accelerating deforestation and encroachment on remaining wildlife habitats. In addition to being at the forefront of the current pandemic crisis, Brazil is also at the leading edge of the deforestation crisis, with potentially significant implications for future pandemic risks. The World Council of Churches, as the leading instrument of the international ecumenical movement and a global fellowship of churches, always seeks to be a voice and advocate for the churches and their ministries in their own contexts. We have a special priority for the poor and most vulnerable, and for care for creation, our shared home, and all that lives on it. We seek also to encourage and support the diaconal ministries of the churches in promoting peace and human rights and in responding to suffering and injustice. Tomorrow, the 7th of May, WCC will join the Catholic Bishops' Conference of India, the National Council of Churches in India, and the Evangelical Fellowship of India in marking a day of prayer and fasting for the healing of India in solidarity with the Indian people's struggle in the teeth of the pandemic. Today, for the same reasons, we are joining all of you in this seminar, recognizing the tragedy afflicting Brazil. The situation in Brazil, including in the context of the pandemic and its impacts, fully warrants closer accompaniment and support by the WCC and by all international ecumenical partners. We have and will continue to engage in consultation with the churches of the country in order to identify ways in which that accompaniment and support can be offered constructively in the midst of such extreme political polarization. Ultimately, it will be for the people of Brazil to form their own views based on evidence and experience rather than polemic, and to exercise their electoral power to ensure that government serves the interests of its people, all its people, starting with those whose vulnerability, poverty, marginalization, and exclusion has been deepened during this pandemic. Obrigado. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Peter. You know how much it means.
Thank you very much, Peter. You know how much it means to us to be here.
Accompanying and, well, believing in our narrative about what happened in Brazil in the last years. So thank you very much. É muito importante ter uma fala internacional.
It's very important to have this international intervention and see that internationally the perception is similar to the one we have here and we have discussed and debated here, and the concern with us and with Brazil from situations, from institutions like the World Council of Churches. So we're very thankful. We have a few questions. If anyone else would like to add their questions in the chat box, but we already have a few questions, so I will read them aloud. And just a second. We have 8 minutes left in this panel. But since we began running it a little bit late, we will have about 10-15 minutes for this Q&A moment. And we have here a few questions. So for example, one of which that I'm going to read, and then I will ask Dr. Vecina and Dr. Aida to reflect on it. And there is the possibility of a catastrophic scenario in Brazil that may prevent all of the minimal efforts and the vaccines if we keep on this path of necropolitics by this genocide government. And is that as an irreversible scenario? And the second question is, can we have a collapse in the depths that will impact soil and the environment? And then I have a third question. And then if we have other questions here, we can ask them later on. And the third question, what are the unfolding and the results of Biden's initiative? What are the effects of Biden's initiative in terms of breaking with the patents? How does that affect the particular case of Brazil? So you have 2 minutes each to comment on the questions. 3. Okay, please.
Vamos inverter, doutora Aida, depois doutor Gonçalo.
Ah, meu Deus, olha só, né?
Okay, let's start with Dr. Aida. In my modest opinion, in terms of cause and effect, I believe this mortality issue, the mass mortality, and the impact in the point of view not only of deforestation but also population, we must be quite careful because the infecting doses, they are different from each individual. So, which doesn't mean that I may have been exposed to the virus and to have been asymptomatic or having the mild cases. Well, the diagnosis is different for each. So I do not believe in this of the severe impact of mortality collectively speaking, because we have the faith, we have our mental health, it's a social one, and food, the organic affairs, they are different from, and they respond differently to each person. So we have strategies being already taken in terms of vaccination of the populations that are being vaccinated, not only in Brazil, but in Latin America in general, and in the world context. We have restrictions in terms of barriers and borders. There are countries that are they open their borders at a point, and we Brazilians are not allowed to enter many countries. In the ever-growing cases, this is we can't reach a common denominator on that right now. So, but with regards with the collapse in the terms of in pollution and of rivers, so there's a there there certainly all healthcare. Well, let me see. This is my environment, research environment. Uh, we have the context of health regulation by Anvisa and by the states and municipalities of guidance on these different areas, as well as the people who are victim of this infecting virus. So we do not have data that approval, because this, at a smaller scale, this has always existed in terms of the graves of people that may have comorbidities in terms of bacteria, virus, and fungi. But we need to be very careful in regulation, in guidance for the professionals and in the units, the households, the ICU units. So this whole regulation, although, because what we have the people on the street dwellers that will be vulnerable to the virus, because, well, not all will be exposed. I mean, exposed to the agents, but not everybody will develop the disease, which is well, the disease as a whole in general. So there is the constant context of some hypotheses, but the collective mortality, in my modest opinion as researcher, I do not believe it's going to happen. So, Professor, well, regarding President Biden's, well, uh, I'd just like to say that Professor Gonzalo, I'm a big fan of you. Dr. Ida, I'd like to thank you for your kind words. Um, I'm very humbled by them. I was quite glad to hear you, and as well as Professor Peter. I fully agree with him. The two answers you've given, they were perfect. I fully agree with you. We have done many wrong things with the hygiene, with this cleaning the food. You know what? Leave the graves alone. Well, the Biden affair is a great promise. Well, for Brazil, I don't think there won't be a lot of changes because we have Butantan and Fiocruz with the technology transfer project from AstraZeneca and Sinovac, as well as Butantan developing Butanvac vaccine, which is quite promising and is under production, but it still needs to go through clinical tests, which will probably be over by the end of this year and the beginning of next year. That will be the end of the clinical tests of the vaccine that is being developed by the University of São Paulo at Ribeirão Preto. But we have more industries, we have more capacity of receiving technology transfers from other companies. Currently, we have 5 pharmaceutical industries of national capital with the capacity of receiving technology for the production of vaccines, even with a messenger RNA vaccine. So there is an opening for that. I don't know how this is going to unfold. We have the capacity, and we may have an important provider of vaccines for the rest of the world. So we must be open for that. But let's see what's going to happen. I believe we need to put on record the importance of the gesture of President Biden. And once again, there is a humanitarian uh, portion, but there is also the strategic intelligence of the Americans.
Pastora Luz Marina, como a senhora pediu para...
Professor Luz Marina, there you go.
Tá bem. Tem uma pergunta também a respeito.
Well, there's a question about Anvisa regarding the Sputnik. So, if possible, the Russians are the Russians right? Well, the Russians distributed their vaccine for around 62 countries. Droplet by droplet. Some countries, Slovakia went back, and they are returning the Russian vaccines. The country that has a health surveillance, the best health, one of the best health surveillance of these countries is Argentina. The health surveillance is not going well. I had the possibility of reading Professor Jaime Letovsky's declaration, and he was director, and says that Anvisa is right. Anvisa does not want more. They can from Johnson, AstraZeneca, from Pfizer, and Sinovac to register. So we have already 4 vaccines in Brazil. Sputnik is not being registered, and why? because they're missing data. I won't be able to discuss what data is missing, but there are data missing. The big problem of the Sputnik V is that the ones that who talk about the vaccine, it's not the Gamaleya Institute that developed the vaccine, is the Russian fund of participation of Mr. Kirill Dmitriev. He's a trader. He doesn't understand anything of vaccines. He understands of provoking them. And he came here to say, I want to have a debate with Anvisa in the National Congress. He's going to do that with the Russian one, but not in Brazil. We're the bosses of ours. So either the Russian give the data or there won't be vaccination. That it's probably good, but they need to provide the data.
Entendi. Muito obrigada.
Well, got it. Thank you.
There is a question for you, Peter. And it is, Peter, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
You are there. Okay. Yes. So, we have been trying to find ways to. Desculpa aí, gente. Eu vou falar. Não, posso falar em inglês, né? E aí os tradutores. Tá bom. We have been trying to strategize and find ways to, of course, to face this situation in which we are now in Brazil. And one of our concerns is we need to access international organizations, such as, of course, the World Council of Churches, you know us, so it's easier, the communication, such as the UN, such as perhaps the World Health Organization. So for us to speak with these organizations, perhaps we need support of another international organizations that are connected to churches. So is there possibility, for instance, if we want to access the UN, some mechanisms of the UN, that the World Council of Churches could support us? I mean, is there opening for this possibility? This is one of our organization's group questions that we wanted to ask you, in fact.
Absolutely. The World Council of Churches has very close, even daily relationships with UN partners, in particular with the UN human rights system, but also agencies such as WHO and many others, both in Geneva and in New York. And I think that one of the things that the WCC can and actually wants to do is to facilitate access for its constituency, for its member churches and partners, to engage with those mechanisms, to present their concerns and their evidence, and to make the best use of those sorts of mechanisms for addressing the problems that you face and ensuring accountability, at least some sort of accountability for problems that have arisen. So the answer to that is yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Eu vou precisar encerrar, eu acho.
I will need to adjourn right now. I believe right now. Well, I'd like to thank all of you. You were amazing, very kind to be with us.
For your kindness to be with us. E a gente vai se... acabou de tocar o meu tempo aqui, o temporizador para a nossa extensão.
So my timer just rang for our... So we're closing in at the right time. So we're going to remain in touch with all of you for next steps, because we want this seminar to have consequences. So thank you very much. And please stay tuned should you want, and we'll continue our conversations other ways.
Bom dia.
Bom, isso. Então, nós vamos para a nossa última mesa desse seminário.
So we go to the next round table.
Agradeço a participação de pastora Luz Marina, Eu sou Daniel Seidel, secretário
I would
executivo.
like to thank the introduction by Pastor Luz Marina. I am Daniel Seidel from the CCPAS Commission, and I'm very happy to have accompanied all of the seminar. And in the seminar, we really insisted people to be able to accompany the next, all of the 3 days, because it's very important to accompany all the important information that was brought forth here. And also what Peter mentioned in terms of the Brazilian situation and the pathways we can take. And we want the seminar to be part of a process of unity of all social strengths at a national level, but that also constructs these strategies in international partnerships. And that is why we mobilize the best of the best we have in terms of spirituality and in terms of the liberty as good listeners. And because we want to hear back from you, and I take this moment to thank all of the institutions that were part of this huge effort to bring this seminar about. And this is an ecumenical job, and that was constructed in partnerships. And in this job of constructing a plan for the country, we need to address all of our emergencies and to realize what is the role that religion and the faith institutions have in the relationship with politics, in the relationship with economy, because we have very important society voices, but these voices need to be united. So without further ado, I would like to invite our panelists, and as I call them out, I will also introduce them. We have our dear companion, João Pedro Stabli, in this roundtable, and then Pastor Romi, and we will also count with Thomas. He's from a network, the Cobra network, and it's a network of alliances and solidarity between Brazil and Germany. So right now I would like to ask our friend João Pedro. He is the translation apologizes, but Daniel seems to have a frozen screen. He has a PhD with the Autonomous University of Mexico. So, João Pedro, what have you heard and that you think are good pathways to conduct the pandemic? Good morning, Daniel, and everyone who are with us. Can you hear me? Yes, very well. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the privilege of being with you today. So many people that are committed, and historically and in practice, our people, I feel very privileged, but at the same time, I have a huge responsibility. But I had a friend that some of you have met, José Gomes da Silva. He was the president of INCRA with President Sarney. He's the father of Graziano, who was FAO president. And he used to tell me, João Pedro, there are times where we need to risk our diploma. So I'm risking my diploma. And Zé Gomes' diploma was of course our responsibility and the knowledge and experience we accumulate throughout our lives. And me and Pastor Romi will do this closing comments, which is an additional privilege. we do not, we don't expect to be the last ones to speak because this will be a prolonged process. And I didn't really prepare anything, but I believe that I will talk a little bit more about the socioeconomic aspects, and I will leave the philosophical and theological aspects to our friend Romi. I also didn't want to incorporate so many elements of crisis and of environmental crime because our friend Luis Marques is one of the main authorities on this thing. He did a very deep reflection on this, and there's a very classic book that is a reference we should all have. I have one, I can't find it right now, but it was published in 2015, which is The Environmental Collapse. It's the title of the book. So if you want to know what's happening in the environmental crisis and the environmental crimes in Brazil, all you have to do is read Luis Marques's book. And I also did not incorporate any reflections on the health team. The last two presentations were very impressive. Both have so much knowledge and wisdom. So I recommend that the coordination of the event shares with us the link for the interventions of Dr. Gonzalo and Dr. Aida, because these are elements that we need to incorporate in our fight. It's not just a lecture that is given today. And what I intend to do here is a bit of a summary with some personal ideas, and I have divided my presentation into three topics: the diagnosis of the reality, the second one, the need to have a project, and the third, how can we construct this project? And about the reality, I think all of the panelists and all of the questions were very rich and detailed. And we can really have an overview of what is going on in the world and in Brazil. And I think that the essence of this analysis of the reality really showed us that we have a crisis in the capitalist production model that is a historic contradiction, a decadent contradiction in a way of organizing production and life that no longer meets the demands of the population, because it is a system that is where the financial capital has the hegemony, and international organizations that tell governments what to do, control public institutions, and put profit above anything. And these institutions are not even interested in exploring people's work, and they also don't produce the necessary goods that the society needs. And that's why I have the conviction that the structural crisis we're going through with capitalism, I think our generation will see the decadence of capitalism, and we need to think about what will happen in post-capitalism. And amidst this analysis of the reality, I noticed several elements that describe the environmental aggression, including the comments of Luis Marques. We could be at the final crossroad and the point of no return in regard to saving the beings that inhabit our planet. And that is when we should include the theme of defending nature and the environment as a way to save humanity and the planet. And with this, I also want to add that our friend Leonardo Malfi has done some really great reflections that help us to understand this holistic and this connection of the several forms of life of which human beings are just part and that we depend on for our survival. And it is within this context of the structural crisis of capitalism that we are currently watching a crisis of the state and of the elitist democracy. The elitist democracy and the bourgeois democracy has become highly hypocritical. Power does not emanate from the people. It is now controlled by capital. And Brazil may be the clearest example of this. The people does not control the judiciary power, the executive power, or the legislative power. And now the Brazilian central bank has also been stolen from the people, and it has been given autonomy, and its administration has been handed over to the bankers. So we have a crisis of the political regime, especially in Brazil, but all over the world, and even in the Vatican, as has been called to our attention by the speeches of our Pope Francis. The systematic violation of the fundamental rights of the people is the essence of the capitalist system. Why would they guarantee territory, education, and dignified homes? Why would they distribute wealth if their logic is to concentrate profit and wealth? So we are currently going through a very serious crisis, and one of our panelists even said that the Brazilian case, this elitist ideology, which has the hegemony in the society, and it has a bourgeois origin, but it is hegemonic in society of discrimination, of violence, and hatred towards poor people. The roots of this particular ideology of the Brazilian elite is rooted in the over 300 years of slavery that mark our society until present day, be it through the discrimination of indigenous people, of Black population, of poor people, because rich Brazilians hate poor Brazilians, but they want them as domestic workers to do everything inside their homes because they can't even wash their own dishes or wash their own clothes. They always need to have a slave who from the little room where they kept inside an apartment. And just closing this synthesis of our reality, we're going through a very serious historical period that is manifested in Brazil, but is also manifested internationally. In the international plan, I would add that the environmental crimes are the responsibility of all, and that international institutions are bankrupt. Nobody respects what the UN says, what FAO says, what the deep down, the OMC is the one that calls the shots. The only international organization that decides the things in the world is the Davos Economic Forum that meets where the 500 biggest capitalists in the world meet yearly, and there they decide about our lives. And that's a contradiction because nobody believes the international institutions anymore. And at the international level, the sovereignty of peoples is also at stake. And our civilization's values, as was said here, capitalism is based on consumerism, irresponsible consumerism, and individualism. And those are not values. Those are anti-values, anti-collective values. It destroys society. Nobody can admit that it is possible to have a society based on individuals that think only about themselves and on consumerism. Margaret Thatcher used to think that, but she's currently in hell. We can We can write to hell and they will tell us that this person, this elitist who came from Earth is currently burning. But all joking aside, it is necessary for us to think about a new popular project for Brazil and a post-capitalist program for the world, because we can't expect anything more from capitalism. Not even the Pope expects anything. And I hope that the World Council of Churches doesn't expect anything from capitalism as well. So what would be the nature of this new project? We don't know. We would have to construct it. That's the importance of seminars like this one, to reflect. What I say here is that we need to have a few new paradigms that should be the north of our debate and our reflection of what this new project would be, that go beyond the historic doctrines of socialism. Socialism is a generous idea, as my friend Antonio Cândido would say. He was a socialist, and someone asked him once, "What is socialism, sir?" And he said, "Are all actions Socialism is all actions that seek an egalitarian society. That's socialism." But if you think about a program for a nation, a program for a civilization, we need to take into account some new frameworks. We can't just follow a doctrine. The first framework is that the goal of our socioeconomic organization should be to try to guarantee the well-being and a good life for everyone with the distribution of wealth and income, seeking to achieve an egalitarian society and combating social inequality. The second parameter is a commitment to defend the environment and prevent the privatization of common goods like forests, waters, biodiversity, land, territories. And with that, Marx also called our attention to that, to avoiding consumerism. And Marx also told us to stop eating so much meat, and then we will stop deforesting the Amazon. And we need to look for an egalitarian society, because in the essence, as we see in the Bible, we're all equal. If we're children of God, we're all equal. Even though some people no longer have hair, even though the color of the skin is different, or even though our cultures and our religious practices are different, because all of this is richness. And the fourth paradigm that was just highlighted by our last two interventions, which is the right to health, because health is life. So the right to health for all. And here in Brazil, this is translated into the strengthening of the public health system, because rare countries in the world have a universal public health system, a SUS, because SUS is not just an acronym or a public policy. SUS would be an acronym that expresses this universal right. Are you a human being? Okay, so society will take care of you so that you don't get sick, first of all. And if you do, we will take care of you. If you need medication, we will give it to you. If you need healthcare, we will guarantee it to you. And SUS has this objective. And we need to have a new paradigm for a new democratic state. This bourgeois state that has emerged from the French Revolution, it no longer serves us. Of course, they will participate in the elections, but what is fundamental is that in the new project, we defend the popular participation with new ways of popular decision making. In Switzerland, they hold plebiscites for deciding the name of the street. So since we have 60 million adults, we could vote for everything. Why does the president decide everything here? I authorize guns. I don't want a vaccine. Why is it always him? The people need to have the power. There are several forms of popular organization that we have to defend. We need to think about agriculture, and now talking about what I do. Agriculture needs to be organized for its fundamental principle, which is to produce healthy food for all Brazilians. And can anyone imagine that 60% of Brazilian people doesn't drink milk, doesn't eat cheese, doesn't have yogurt, and even the consumption of beans, which was something very common, is being denied to the working man. So we need to stop giving money to agribusiness and exporting and only exporting commodities. Hell is full of big business farmers. And what we need to think about is the agriculture that produces healthy foods and think about life. And we need to think about a model that values and does not discriminate cultural diversity, religious diversity, sexual orientations, and fights the patriarchy and all kinds of oppression. And lastly, as a paradigm for this new project, it is necessary to cultivate humanitarian values. To counterpose consumerism and individualism, we need to defend solidarity, equality, and social justice. And Danielle, if you only allow me a few minutes more for my third chapter here, is how do we construct this alternative project? And here I will do a collective self-criticism. But here in the seminar, we did not discuss this very much. So we're still poor. And this is a problem of the left wing in general, or as Christians, if you will. We are good at analyzing and discussing, but what do? We're not very good at that practical experience. And so I'll just leave my self-criticism here. In this debate, we didn't have many ideas about how to construct this alternative project. So I will just identify a few general things to be discussed. A new alternative project cannot be just advertising our ideals, because that is idealistic, and idealistic ideas do not come to fruition. It will only become a reality, and this was said here, if we build this program together with the people. And that's why we need to debate with the people, stimulate people to reflect, and stimulate people to construct and design a program organized around these paradigms. So it's not just for the people. Either we do it with the people or we don't do it at all. And we also need to develop new methodologies of working with the bases. And everyone talks about communicating with the people and doing basis work, but working with the bases is doing ant work and little by little making everyone feel included, and then scaling this up to the national level. Us, and I am talking about the left wing here, we only have a tongue, but we don't have ears. And some fathers and pastors also suffer from this problem. They only talk to the people, they only say things at the people, but they don't ask, what do you want? So we need to have less tongue and more ears and eyes to understand the necessity. And that's why I think it is necessary to develop new methods to work with the bases. And again, I'm doing self-criticism here. We are only accustomed to that discourse and to rationality. We want to explain the ideas to the people. And there's a joke we tell at the landless movement. When it's just talk, it goes inside one ear and out the other. But when the message is seen by your eyes, it goes inside the brain and it doesn't leave. Or when it goes to your heart, it goes to your heart and it doesn't leave. So we need to find methodologies that speak to the hearts and the minds of the people with other ways, in other ways, using culture, using knowledge, using art, using music, theater, poetry, right? That's what we call the mystics. What are mystics? I learned this from Marcelo Barros, a monk and also a spiritualist. The mystic, he told me, is using cultural symbols to cultivate the project because the project is still a mystery. It will come about in the future. So since we are not able to materialize their vision, we need to cultivate it with the symbols, with art, with music, with singing, with flags, with colors, all of this. This is our mystics. And going into Romi's field and perhaps trying to teach her what she knows best, but the method of constructing this project should also look for ways to democratize knowledge to the people. And education, scientific knowledge is very important. So building schools. If you don't have scientific knowledge, you will never stop inventing the wheel. So traditional knowledge and science is an important part of the project. Once I was discussing with some workmen, and they said, I want to give everyone a car, was their project. And I told them, if everyone who lives in São Paulo that currently have cars go out to the streets of their car, the traffic will be insane. So what does scientific knowledge teaches us? The only way to get around distant cities is collective transportation. It's the subway, it's the electric bus, not individual cars that reflect individualism of people looking dumb and sitting alone inside a metal box surrounded by other metal boxes. So even though in the future we will depend on a program because we can't fight without an ideal, it's quite evident that in order for this project to advance, we need to involve the masses. If the people doesn't fight, we won't have any change. But also, we can't hide behind that. While the people doesn't go to the streets, we will sit and wait. No, we can, in our daily lives, have revolutionary practices of accumulating strength to our project. The landless movement does not wait for the government to implement agroecology. No, we plant and we distribute food. When we do this, we are already cultivating this new project. And finally, since I already went a little bit over time, but Daniel didn't cut me off, none of us has the right to be pessimistic. This year marks the 100th year of Paulo Freire, and more than ever, we need to use the verb he has invented for our idiom to be hopeful and to think about a project of society. And if you have any doubts, you can ask Romi. Bye. Thank you, João Pedro, for your wonderful presentation. And that brings several interesting ideas in the sense of provoking what is essential in our vision of society and what are the elements we are going to have to construct these paradigms in Brazil, and how can we construct that, and then being very coherent to Pope Francis and talking about the construction with the people, articulating popular knowledge with the knowledge of science, which has been so denied as of late. And then the role that mysticism plays and the reconstruction of the work with the basis. I think these are elements that structure this continuity. And just thanking João Pedro, who stays with us, who remains with us. Now we will call for the wisdom of Romi, or Romi, as you have said, brings us. She is a pastor, a pastor, a woman, a leader in the National Christian Churches Council, and she coordinates the Ecumenical Forum of Brazil and the social platform movement, and from also a feminist outlook and bringing her vision, having gone through such great challenges in her role in the ecumenical community, where we had so many questions that came from this fundamentalism that we're currently questioning. And Romi, you have the floor.
Então, primeiro, eu quero expressar agradecimento.
First and foremost, I'd like to deeply thank João Pedro and Thomas, because both have accepted a challenge that was of being with us throughout the whole seminar, well, to bring some elements and practical actions. Because what has moved the seminar was the unrestness of what to do, as it is an unrestness that came from Dom Leonardo from Amazonas. That's when we started all of our movement, the Respira Brasil, Breathe Brazil movement, which is an interreligion, plural movement that joins together the people without fear in popular Brazil, and tries to replicate from an interreligious perspective, from a faith perspective. So it is very important to recognize this availability, both of Thomas as well as João Pedro. And similarly, I must speak of the great responsibility that I'm aware that I have here, because in fact, I believe I'm here for the trust of a collective, which is what has prepared the seminar in a short period of time. A seminar that has been built in a joint effort, that each one of us has established what they could, what they're able to, and how they could contribute. That, and then many other movements were added to it, and it is an ever open process. It's not closed at all. It is a seminar that has been brought by different organizations, but these organizations, they are part of, they are not owners, they are part of this process. Therefore, we have an open process. I opened this small text, as I'm not so I'm not such a communicator as João Pedro is. I will read, not to go over my time, and I tend to dialogue my reading. It is a set of reflections that evidently need to be deepened, but it comes from what I have spoken. But it comes from theological perspectives. And looking at how we could tackle the fundamentalism. So the Brazilian tragedy, the risk to the common house. Well, first, I bring the memory from the beginning of the seminar, and I start with the quote of Rosane Borges, and she said as such, well, uh, people who work under others, they continue the unpassed past. Well, the the people who work under others, they continue a past that is not past. Which past is ever present throughout so many centuries of history. Throughout the seminar, this present past has been defined by the reflections of Rosani, of Benilda, Ailton, and Nara. A colonialistic past uh, administered most of the time by bandits, as Ailton has mentioned. They always have their place of homogeneity, characterized by state policies that made it feasible the minimum for the people who work under others would stop dying, but no commitment with policies or to policies that allow the creation of ways of living. Another aspect is to understand that this past that is not past has established norms for the sharing of common that has brought us here. Those are norms that reach their limit, as Ron Pedro has rightly mentioned in the crisis of capitalism. For them to remain valid, for these policies to remain valid, in fact, the non-dying policy, well, perhaps these policies would be not enough. It is necessary right now for the policies to kill, to exterminate, basically the use of the pandemic for, or to allow deaths to take place. And the originary people and traditional people, they know and live this past present that updates itself in new forms of extermination. This crisis is the reflex or a continuity of an ever-present past within ourselves. It is our mirror that reflects the image of what we are. As Benilda has said, we black people denounce this tragedy ever since the first enslaved black person arrived. And this reflects the form that Ailton Fanak has characterized Palestine, a tribe that has lost and confined itself, was confined to Palestine, is the portion of land that was left for them, but now they want to remove it because there are existences that may not exist for the capitalism.
Palestina são essas resistências. E o passado
Those resistances, the unsettling past that is ever present. How many Palestinians we have in Brazil? And this ever-present past has a historical base that was defined by Ailton. This base is what fundaments the inequality of the extermination policy, the hegemony of a god, and the underworkness of the holy with their peoples. How many holy this the single God has eliminated in this continent called Brazil, together with each other holy silenced. They silence peoples who are part of this territory that we have not met yet. Our theoretical history structures a violent, race-strict, patriarchal country that does not stand diversity that is expressed by biomes, by peoples, by cultures, and by the different faiths. And now, how about the necessary alliances and the urgent strategies? What would they be? Magali gives us the key to understand the political structure that, well, political framework that structures violence, and he characterizes the fundamentalism as a search of an ethical religious countries with the establishment of the law of God money, as Marx says. The fundamentalisms have expression in economics, which is neoliberalism at the end of history, in culture, such as nationalism, xenophobia, and the hate against diversity. They are concrete forms of interpreting reality. It is a world view of acting according to this interpretation that is done from a religious matrix. And the action of this matrix, of this religious matrix, is bound to the political view, both interpretation as well as the political action. They join together and flow mutually. The fundamentalisms reinvent from the demands of each historical moment. The historical dimension is maintained with the fundamental faith based on the scriptures of the Holy Scriptures, where you have the model of perfect society superior to any other invented by humans. The political dimension is the concreteness of the cultural matrix, and we enact a fundamental reality that makes the ends to be achieved state, ethical, political state, the values to be defined. And the fundamentalists, they lay hand of century-old systems, such as uh, the lake state and human rights. And I'd like to call your attention to the way in which the fundamentalist movements that form us, and they surround us, they try to find all the time new forms of characterizing or defining human rights. The human rights are field under dispute, or the field under struggle. This religious idea of hegemony that has been brought by Kanak, and he says, God created the world and put the white people to rule it. We might say the whites, males, capitalist rich, investors, biome destructors. The seminar provokes us or makes us revise them. We, from the church, Christian people, we revise some central paradigms that may open the path to think other ideas of life. Since, well, after all, Christianism is part of the hegemony structure that historically maintained inequalities in the country. First and foremost, I'd like to call the attention to what Olaf has said when he talked about the original sin. He said the original sin is to mock the other. And I lay hand on the feminist theory and its hermeneutics. And I ask, why the myth of the original sin was associated to women, to Eve, associating the knowledge between good and evil, and not to the history of Genesis 4:10, when Cain kills Abel and says, the voice of your brother climbs to the earth. To myself, the original sin is that, is the brother killing brother, is the inequality, is the destruction of planet Earth. And Fabio has brought us other central elements that are part of this ever-present past, which are theological paradigms to be revised urgently, in fact. Uh, the idea of the holy, the sent by God, Bolsonaro, cannot be taken away because his authority was given by God. And that's what we heard in our impeachment. Peace was brought. Well, at CONIC, we received countless emails and texts on Facebook. How can do you want to overthrow someone whose authority was given by God? Second, the idea that there is an elected people. There are people elected by God. And I learned with the Palestinian churches when we had a dialogue between churches, among churches between in Brazil and Palestine, that if there is an elected people, There are other ones that were rejected. And what structures us in Brazil is the awareness that there is an elected people, which is, once again, the white, patriarchal. This is a theology that is structured by racism, and with that, other peoples and cultures have been rejected. The overcoming of this idea of strong person, the idea of Messiah, of the Savior, overcoming the idea of centrality of the temple, in which the discussion was ever present on STF for a while, and the idea of a single God, of the money God, must also be overcome. How many affinities, elective affinities, are there between the elaboration of theology, of a single God, and the relationship with a theology, the monotheistic theology of capitalism that says the only God is money. More than elective affinities with the Christian hegemonic idea, there's more than that, and the continuation of the ever-present past, and the political Christian policy, the matrix of this ever-present past, were part of this hegemony. We allowed the structuring of hegemonies, and we prevented talks. And not to be so pessimistic, I'd like to bring what Benilda has mentioned, which says, and here pointing out two perspectives. The ever-present past has a history of resistance because there are the survivals. And Benilda introduces herself, she defines herself as a survivor of racism. And the survivals are the heresy of the present past. And when I talk the heresy, I bring Silva that says the movements, the heretic movements, they were and are movements and powers of people under others that require spiritual renovation, social justice, and they challenge the structures and the superior truth in the churches. Then they challenge the secular authorities. Historically, heresy has denounced social hierarchies, private property, and the accumulation of wealth, and defined and offered the possibility of new concepts and equalitarian concepts of societies. The heresy redefined all the aspect of daily lives, work, property, sexual reproduction, situation of women. The anti-racism is a heretic practice if you think about a society that is structured by the color, by the whiteness. It established the emancipation in terms truly universalized, provided a humanitarian a way of living to allow the communities to have a network of support, create as schools, and to be accomplices of the legalization of the illegal in Brazil, as Nara Baré has mentioned. We are provoked to be heretics in order for the diversity not to be asphyxiated. Well, we need heresy, and we need to understand, to be aware that we live in a war, what to do. Well, from the perspective of our very traditional faith, which is Christianism, we try to bring different exercises that are insufficient. I'd like to highlight the whole movement of the critical reflection around the 500 years of evangelization of Brazil. It was an extremely important movement of self-criticism, but it was insufficient because it was a process that didn't have continuity. We need to go beyond the theology of freedom or liberation or the theologies of liberation. Just like Rosane Bosch has mentioned, we need to start with an inventory of practices that have been already elaborated, but going beyond to be able to contribute with new ethos, with new paradigm and other ideas of life, think about the accumulation in a sense of, well, the goods of mankind and the profit accumulation without the sharing. So the 500 years of evangelization, as well as our theologies of freedom, were not enough to problematize or to increase the problematics or how the sharing of common good go. Um, how to break with the Christian hegemony. In spite of the advances, they repeated the logics of establishing the recognition, the different recognitions. Hasn't heard the employee or wanted to speak for them, for the regular worker, and how to contribute, how to create the common from and out of the institutionality. You looked at the world under the perspective of God because it maintained the perspective, the patriarchal perspective and control perspective, and once again hegemonize under this a single umbrella Christianism. The different, it did not promote the diversity, but it maintained somehow a theology already a subtle theology. And due to the short time, I won't explain on that, but if you know a little bit of the Bible, you know what the the theology that means, the domination. To take on the ecumenism, well, we need to see that as a movement of the people under others. And with that, we must go beyond, but we need to think about the dialogue among faith in the interreligious dialogue. Otherwise, we'll bring hegemony to the ecumenic. To be able to talk about the common household and well-being from the Christian theology, we need to overcome the idea of the kingdom of God, because kingdom remits to empire, into Christ King, the kingdom of God, his structural hegemonies, even when he talks about justice. Why not saying and or learning about the well-being, the well-living, where we are one of the expressions of faith among others? To listen instead of speaking, as João Pedro has mentioned, not to be participants in the injustice. Because God has heard the, the cries of people and not spoke of the cries of people. And Olaf said something that I'd like to emphasize as well, is that the soul of church is at stake when the message, the Christian message, is established to legitimate injustice. How are we going to bring them into the common house if we're going to break the original scene of considering yourself hegemonic, of not feeling uneasy when brothers kill brothers, being by institutional policies, being by racism, being by patriarchy or misogyny or xenophobia? We need to be careful not to recolonize the proposal of the common house and to maintain standing or power. And in that sense, the exercise of listening to what the peoples and the traditional communities and original communities have taught us about the common house, about the well living. And the common good is good news that we may take on. There is no way to face the Brazilian tragedy, the fundamentalism, without being heretic, which is anti-racism, the cooperation and the break of borders, as Nara says. She says she lives in a triple border, without considering the perspective of the common, of diversity, of the rights of the people and nature, peoples and natures. Even if the human rights are from a perspective, from a legal perspective, or a legal perspective seen from the rights of people, why can't we problematize that and talk about the rights of the people and nature? and take a step beyond. Income distribution is a way of being hierarchic, and our unified health system as a closer experience of a policy of the common. And future tasks and immediate tasks by a group that has elaborated the seminar, and for the ones that are within that, is the elaboration of a document of a final text with the strategies and the articulation for action. First, we'll take the next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Romi. And it's important how you talked about listening and bringing us very deep reflections about our theological way of thought and of doing, and the questions and the comments were only multiplied. And my difficulty was reading the questions and at the same time not missing all of the inspiring comments you made with centrality of the original peoples and the people who are marginalized in Brazil, and even using the title of our seminar, and the broadening of the common home is not just a task for now, but we need to reflect on it. And in the short time we still have, I would like to invite Thomas to have the floor and make his comments and remarks on how João Pedro, this potent contributions by Romi, were received by you and in a network, and as someone who has lived through Brazil, has lived in Brazil for such a long time. So just introducing Thomas, he has lived here, I believe, 18 years, and he is the director, was the director of the Borough institution, and has a degree by the Manchester University. And then he moved back to Germany, where he's a writer and activist and a coordinator of this cooperation network with us. You have the floor. Good morning, everyone. Can you understand me? Because right now I'm in Portugal, in my friend's house, and I'm taking advantage of her structure. It's a great honor to be here in the seminar. I was very impressed with everything you have said in the last few days, very deep contributions, and I'm a bit scared that I'm a bit afraid that I won't be so profound, but I will come back to a more modest context. But I think I can make a few comments that resonate with everything that was said, including in the previous days. So I wanted to reflect on international cooperation and the social cooperation and cooperation between NGOs, and I will talk about this. Bolsonaro, let's go back to Bolsonaro. He did something that is unprecedented. He's the most well-known Brazilian president in the last few decades. The previously most well-known president was Lula, but he was known for being active because he was active in very international forums, in his ministers as well. But Bolsonaro is known worldwide as an evil president. And when he won the election, he was inserted in a right-wing populist wave that was seen in the US with Trump and in Hungary, or in Messina in Poland, and several extreme right-wing movements. For example, in Europe, we have a movement that is a huge fan of Bolsonaro and that shares several points of view, such as the polemic with so-called gender ideology and a deconstruction of everything that has to do with climate change. They think that's fake news. And these are 2 points that unite the far right. And with the exit of Trump, I think that this genocide politics is a bit different from other European leaders. He is a denier of humanitarian international policies. He's an example of this. And the press, also in Germany, always criticizes him for this. So I will look at a few risks and some fake pathways for international cooperation. And first of all, this fixation with Bolsonaro as the evil figure, because he is, of course, but he is not alone and he's not crazy. That is what the international perception is denying. We were shocked in the European press when we heard that German businessmen celebrated Bolsonaro's victory. And the huge international companies up to this day support Bolsonaro. So I think we can't forget that we can't just focus on how crazy he is. It's very important to see that nobody wants to see how crazy he is in Europe and in Germany. And we can't underestimate the political and social context that sustains Bolsonaro. When I give lectures in Germany, I always talk about the Brazilian stock market that went up with Bolsonaro's victory and dropped during COVID and is now doing well again. So the markets never took a stand against Bolsonaro. So I think that's the first thing, focusing on the crazy antics of Bolsonaro is not the pathway. My second point is we cannot bet in international commerce as a response to world crisis. Exactly 2 years ago, we were shocked in hearing that the European Union had signed a contract with Mercosur after 5 months of Bolsonaro government. And I think it was shocking to see how Europe was symbolically supporting Bolsonaro. And it was very shocking also in terms of the environment. It is an agreement that promotes the export of meat from Brazil, the exporting of ethanol and sugar from Brazil. And this brings us back to the fuels discussion. And this is a context. The symbolic act of this agreement was very strong. When they signed this contract, we saw voices in Germany, for example, saying, oh, but it's best to have an agreement because we can do some agreements in human rights. They are signatories to the Paris Agreement because it's a lot better for us to do this because it's all going to work out. But I think, no, we can't trust international commerce and international trade to solve our social problems. I think this has to be an effort of the national democratic efforts of Brazil and not the influence of the international markets. I think that's very important with this perspective of international cooperation. And my next point is we cannot believe that agribusiness is the voice of reason within this Bolsonaro context. Last year, Tereza Cristina, the Agriculture and Livestock Minister of Brazil, went to Germany, to the biggest agribusiness fair in the world, and there was a great protest there against this fair, but Tereza Cristina was very well received because she sells herself as the voice of reason in the Bolsonaro government. Oh, the agribusiness is modern, it's productive, it exports, it feeds the world. So this narrative is very hard and very dangerous. So what happened was the population in Germany abandoned the Brazilian Ministry of Environment, but they are now allies to the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture because they have a more reasonable minister. This is an analysis of agribusiness that doesn't recognize that agribusiness is at the pillars of the Bolsonaro system. So I think this is also very important in this international context. And my last point is the complicated and fake pathways. We have the overvaluing of the perception of the Amazon in the Brazilian context. Of course, I'm not denying that deforestation in the Amazon is very, very shocking and serious, but it's as if in international perception, that's the only thing there is. The Amazon is big, and it's as if the rest of Brazil is just an appendix by the south of the Amazon. Okay, but the problem is looking at the Amazon as a climatic issue, a CO2 issue, and not as a social, political, and economic space. So I think that only looking at CO2 rates and not looking at the peoples who live in that region and just focusing on avoiding emissions, I think that's a great danger in the international context. So talking about these dangers, we have 2 or 3 concrete proposals. We have to have trust in the Brazilian actors. These actors are democratic institutions and social movements, not agribusiness, because these movements are resistant to the Bolsonaro system. That is our common hope internationally. I think that is fundamental. And to me, I think it was very important to hear the comments and the interventions affirming the strength of the resistance in Brazil. And I think that in the international cooperation lacks distrust in Brazilian resistance. I think that's important because this is heretic behavior related to this discourse. Oh, the Paris Agreement, international trade, we need to take other paths. And I think I have 3 international flags that can perhaps unify international struggles. The first one is a campaign that already exists, is a campaign against the European Union and Mercosur agreement. And I think within the context of our participants here, we have this articulation to fight against this. And when I come to Brazil, and I came to Brazil to live there in '92, We had a campaign against alcohol, which has achieved certain success. It was a successful act of resistance. So we need to remember the strength that these acts of resistance have. And the second flag I have here is transforming the fight for agroecology as an international fight as the main flag waved internationally, and in terms of valuing and unifying. And I become emotional when I think about the fight of the farm people in India, and this fight for land and for agroecology, it exists all over the world. So I think we can unify this and articulate this against the agribusiness proposals. And the last one would be to transform a claim and a trend in Brazil and the defense of territories, the territories of indigenous people, of original peoples. We need to broadcast this as an international flag, and we will have several events if COVID allows, and one of which will be the Biodiversity Convention in China, where we will have this proposal of a strategical plan for the next 10 years. And one of the proposals is to have 30% of the earth of the land in the planet to be protected land. This can be an interesting proposal if it goes against the capitalistic ideal, but it's very dangerous that it becomes something that is against the traditional territories. So we need to articulate this argument of protected areas inhabited by traditional peoples. So we need to unify and connect these fights of the several peoples and communities as subjects of rights and the right to nature, and this, like this proposal of the protected areas with inhabited by populations. So these were the three proposals I had to contribute to the seminar to work together in the future. Thank you. Thank you, Thomas.
Principalmente em que
So especially as we can characterize the political project that Bolsonaro embodies, that has the international support, as you yourself has mentioned. And for us not to create illusions that the capitalism view may help us build the social environmental justice and the construction of the role agribusiness brings. And then in the presentation of the strengthening of dialogue of social justice in campaigns that you bring on the Mercosur agreement, agroecology as international fight, and the fight against let's say, in the territorial, the traditional populations, the aboriginal populations, that is we're called upon for international fight. Well, we have several questions that have been set forth. We are quite late. I'd like to say that many of the reverberation of João Pedro has mentioned and Romi has said are in the questions that have been brought in our talk, especially on what I wanted to highlight related to the search of people, and as it was said, the basic education as well as the relationship with the formal education, that what we had in our construction that brings this dialogue, because here is this debate on the ways forward. One of them, Romi has already mentioned, and we are committed to the continuity of this offer. And as she herself said, this movement comes from a set of the social powers that we've had. So in that sense, we have a continuity. First, to to fight for the impeachment, and to have all this articulation among the authors of the impeachment request, even the parliamentarian investigation commission. We have the same in the strategic actions and in the long term, well, we see the eco-social transitions from a colonial view of our experience of faith that is based on the principles presented here by Romi and João Pedro, the anti-racist and the different experiences. I'd like to bring well, after this reading, Romi João Pedro has had access to your chat for us to finish with this discussion. And I must uh, thank all the organizations that have participated, all the websites that have reproduced all the seminar, and first to have a more plural and ecumenic channel, which was CONIC, to reverberate this path that an invitation for the next on the 11th for the great plenary session of the social mobilizing personnel in Brazil. And please, Bianca, forward all that the invitation to all of them in order for us to continue this fight. So now for the final considerations, I know if we remain in the same order. So we have, and then Thomas, João Pedro, then Thomas, and then Romi, as she has started. So she may close our seminar. 2 minutes, please. Thank you, Daniel. Well, trying to be brief. I have sent to the coordination all the notes I've taken to be able to share with all of you. Second, I agree with Thomas. Bolsonaro is only the mirror of the bourgeois, the Brazilian bourgeois, an international bourgeois, in fact, basically. If they look themselves in the mirror, they would see Bolsonaro. He was only elected by this manipulatory economic power of this nature of capitalism that we have explained. So I saw on the chat, it's not the 8% of fanatics that sustain Bolsonaro. Fanatics you have everywhere, even São Paulo. You have the Palmeiras supporters, but that doesn't change lives. Well, you have agribusiness supports Bolsonaro, and as BASF and the European companies that are benefited from that, they support Bolsonaro. The Bolsonaro administration released over 600 new poisons from Bayer, BASF, Syngenta, and others. And there was a joke that was around the internet. If the Russians had presented the Sputnik vaccine as a pesticide, they would have been released. They would be clear. The European companies, they are responsible for the environmental crimes because the pesticides they kill the food and the water and all. And someone asked on chat, could we start by financial capital? Well, we're going to have a period of transition of a fight between the current situation, this crisis, and our project. Without a shadow of a doubt, the main enemy that we have to face is the financial capital. And from that, well, yesterday, the Pope released a video for all saying exactly that. We need to stop the speculation of the financial capital. The Pope, Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize of Economy, it's not any João Pedro. He went to Davos and he told the capitalists, If you want to save this world, statize the banks or make the banks state-owned. So basically, there's this need of control fiscal havens or tax havens, and they increase the control over banks. And if you allow me, Daniel, the grave of the financial capital, you know what will be? The dollar will not be a, there will be a new international currency, not the dollar. So imagine the fiscal havens or the tax havens that have deposits in dollars, and dollars are not going to be used. That will be the salt of the earth, integrate. And so there are issues that bring our tradition, the food production, the defense of agroecology, the defense of nature in the generic sense, well, to defend the land, forests, and defending water, planting trees. If you want to be a revolutionary, plant a tree. The trees help us. So thank you all. Thank you for the privilege of being here. Thank you, Thomas, and then Romi to close. Thank you. Well, well, there's. I know. Although since we're out of time, well, I just want to say that yesterday it was discussed. The proposal of boycotting the exports of soybeans and meat from Brazil. I believe this is a dangerous proposal. We need to think quite well because a situation, if it goes to a situation that they're good or Brazil does this, does that, let's boycott Brazil. I believe a fundamentally wrong thing is the Europeans are good ones and the Brazilians are evil. This depolitize the context of John has had. You see Bayer and Monsanto and etc. They produce all of those things. So it cannot be a boycott against Brazil. Brazil, this would be wrong. And this would be a repetition of neo-colonial narratives. I believe this is very important to prevent in our strategy. Those are fights that we have in the discussions. There are discussions that we have. We need this dialogue with Brazil and this trust. Well, and this democratic movement. Now, it's not way to the way to go is not this wrong path that repeats the neo-colonial way with good intentions. Nevertheless, they're wrong paths. I believe this is the last point that I wanted to bring. Thank you very much. Thomas, well, homie, uh, please follow the prophecy and lead us. So a couple of minutes. Well, it's important, well, to present this final reflection on boycott, which was one of the themes that went through in the preparation of the seminar. And I believe to call the attention to this neo-colonial perspective is very important for us. And I'd like to thank all of you and to say how open we are if you want to join this cornerstone that was created by the seminar and to have as an immediate issue uh, that, well, the Brazilian government has just announced in the United Nations at the end of the year a summit of religions in Brazil to debate religious freedom. We need to be very attentive to that because we know how what how the religious freedom has been instrumentalized to justify violence. Uh, and as we are a seminar that came from the debate of the fundamentalism, um, and we should support this agenda. Well, and let's continue strong and valiant, bold, and revolutionary. Thank you. Thank you, Romi, and all of you that have participated since the last Tuesday with us. The idea is the seminar to be a construction process in the strategies in the short and mid-long term. On the 11th, it's going to be 2 p.m. and in the mid and long runs as well. And we'll discuss in our organizations. We had the Lutheran, CONIC, CBJP, and IHU, who's been a great source of information for us. The sixth social commission, and all this myriad of organizations that agree with interreligious protagonisms. The Respira Brasil, which which Romi has spoken about. So we need to join together in gathering all this unity, the political religious unity that we need. And we have the Seminar of Construction of Strategies. This came from a Justice and Peace Commission, and Vicente Travas was the one that provoked. And then they embraced it. We all embraced it, and we will see how important to listen to that this day is a great space for us to continue concretely to learn more and more about this possibility of construction with the people and not for the people. Pope Francis has said over and over, and our learning needs to be listening the people, just like we did in the Amazon. We know they are protagonists, and from there, we get ideas for us to continue in the different fights in the different biomes of Brazil. So I'd like to conclude this closing ceremony joining João Pedro and Paulo Freire in the 100th anniversary or birthday. The verb to hope, we hope, you hope, we all hope. And let's always hope. With those kind words, we'd like to conclude and hoping that we advance more and more in the strategies and how to do. Once again, I'd like to thank all the organizations and partners that have accepted to participate with us.
Essa nova oração é uma canção de vida, pelo sangue da ferida no chão, que não cicatrizará, nem tampouco deixará de abrir a rosa em nosso coração. E diga sim a quem nos quer abraçar, mas se for pra enganar, diga não. Com as bandeiras nas ruas, ninguém pode nos calar. Com as bandeiras nas ruas, ninguém pode nos calar. Quem nos ajudará a não ser a própria gente, pois hoje não se consente esperar. Somente a rosa e o punhal, somente o punhal e a rosa poderão fazer a luz do sol brilhar. E diga sim a quem nos quer acolher, mas se for pra nos prender, diga não. Ninguém vai ser torturado com vontade de lutar. Ninguém vai ser torturado com vontade de lutar. La 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 ya la ya, la 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 ya la ya la, la 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 ya la ya la la ya, la 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 ya la ya, la 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 ya la ya la, la 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 ya la ya la ya. E diga sim a quem nos quer acolher, mas se for pra nos prender,